Hello and welcome to what is going to be a longer weather topic video. In this video, we are going to be looking at all of the tropical system scales of the world. There's not too many, however, there's just a lot to go over with each individual one. So let's jump right in. First off, we have a total of 7 basins, even though on this map right here there are, 13 shown off. Note that the Northwestern Pacific, which is Area 4 on this map, IV here, accounts for 1/3 of all tropical storm activity worldwide. I've stated in numerous tropical storm short summaries, specifically those on the Pacific, that this region is insanely active and that this should really show that there. Also note that not too far away is the Northern Indian Basin, which is Area 5 or V on this map here. This region is the least active, and in the region below this, Area 6, we have Cyclone Freddy, if I'm not mistaken, still going on at the time of recording, which happen to be March 18th. So we are going to jump right into the scales. The Saffir-Simpson scale is the one that I have grown up with. It is the one that is used in America. So going to be referring to this one with every single other scale as well. The Saffir-Simpson scale was officially adopted in 1973, the same year that the Fujita scale would be officially adopted as well. Originally, this scale actually used both winds and storm surge. However, it was realized that storm surge does not have that great of a connection, really, if any at all. I mean, it does, but not the extent that you think, to wind speed. For example, a Category 3 can produce the same, if not worse, storm surge than a Category 5, because it also depends on whether a hurricane strikes the coast at low or high tide. It depends on a bunch of things. And wind is not the only factor. So that was dropped. The Saffir-Simpson scale is used for the western, or I guess you could also just say the whole Atlantic, as well as the east and central Pacific basins. It is the agencies that it is used by is the NOAA and the JTWC. Putting this here because this is relevant to the Saffir. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center, JTWC, is the one that classifies super typhoons for the West Pacific. And super typhoons are typhoons that have a wind speed at or above 150 miles per hour. So that means that is in the high end Category 4 strength and above, which annoys me a little bit, but I digress. Note that we actually see the term Great Hurricane a lot as you go further back in the years, specifically specifically before 1950, when official name lists were finally being used for the hurricane season. And the term Great Hurricane, again, you'll see it a lot before then, is virtually gone now because of names. So, for example, you can just say, Hurricane um, Helene of 2000 and Hurricane Helene of 2011. You can differentiate the two by just saying the year. But before then, before names, there was just like a great hurricane of whatever place got struck. And the term Great Hurricane tended to describe, as you can read, uh, as you've probably read already, uh, again, historically describes a tropical system with winds greater than or equal to around 130 miles per hour and a general radius of around 100 miles, which would be around 160 kilometers. So that's around Category 4 strength and above. and again, just not used anymore because we have names for storms. Note that there have also been many proposals to introduce a Category 6 addition onto the Sapphire, which, in my opinion, shouldn't be done, and according to the original head of the NHC, shouldn't be done either, because according to him, I believe it was actually Mr. Sapphire himself that was the founding head of the National Hurricane Center, who said that if you have winds at or above, I think it was either 150 or 155 miles per hour for more than just 10 seconds, nearly any structure is going to be obliterated, um, except for like pure concrete structures like a parking garage. The proposals for Category 6, if you're interested, have been anywhere starting at 175 or starting at 180. 175 definitely seems more likely because 180 would give Cat 5 a 30 mile per hour range, with which no other part of the Sapphire has, except for tropical depression, I guess. But um, so if a Category 6 were to be introduced, and if it was either 175 or 180, this is what would happen. Out of just 37 Category 5s ever recorded for the Atlantic, 18 would be Category 6 with 175, and only 8 if Cat 6 started at 180. And only 18 Category 5s have ever been recorded in the East and Central Pacific. So just 5 would be Category 6 if it was 175, and only 3 if Cat 6 started at 180, which, is fair. I'd rather have the top scale only hold like 0.1% of storms that happen. It's the same with happens with tornadoes, like well less than 1% of tornadoes are EF5s, which let's keep it that way, of course. But I digress. Moving on, also of note is that the East and Central Pacific actually has the highest number of storms per unit area um, in any basin, which is quite surprising, given that we definitely don't see the East and Central Pacific seeming like it's as active as other regions, even say like the Southwest Indian, and definitely not the East Pacific. But the East Central Pacific basins are the second most active. Third is the Atlantic. So there you go. Speaking of the West Pacific, we see here on the right-hand side the Japanese Meteorological Agency scale for typhoons, also Japanese Meteorological Agency, it's a JMA. The West Pacific region is defined as the anti-meridian, so 180 degrees east, all the way to 110 degrees east. The J2WC actually monitors east of the anti-meridian, so back towards the US. And note that every single agency listed here all separates the typhoon class differently. The CMA and HKO are the Chinese Meteorological Agency and Hong Kong Observatory, which use the same scale. PAGASA is the Philippines Weather Service, J2WC, and the JMA. So looking at the CMA and HKO, their typhoon status actually ends at 150 kilometers per hour instead of 156. A very strong typhoon is instead called a severe typhoon and is the same, which means that there is a gap in between typhoon and severe typhoon, and then violent typhoon is replaced with super typhoon and starts at 190 kilometers per hour, meaning that you have a overlay of wind speeds between severe and super. Yeah, I don't like that scale. So let's look at Pagasa, again, the Philippines Weather Service. They have their own super typhoon status that started in 2015. That one has winds of 185 kilometers per hour. However, they're very strong, and typhoon are not the same as the JMA, so their whole scale is different, which we don't talk about that, and we're not going to. Note that the Philippines Weather Service will give storms their own names once the storm is within their own jurisdiction. If a storm is outside of the Philippines Weather Service influence, they do not give it a name, which is perfectly fine. And the JTWC gives their own slight variation of names. They'll say like, Tropical Disturbance 22W, W for West. So that's their thing. Note that all but the JTWC, so all the agencies but the Typhoon Warning Center, uses 10-minute sustained wind speeds to determine the maximum strength. However, they do also record 1 minute. In fact, the CMA and HKO do 2 minutes, which be different, I guess. Thank you, China, for being different. I appreciate that. I don't. Same with the Philippines. I don't like the names that they give. It gets confusing because they don't retire them. Not all that much. But I'll talk about this a little later, but 10-minute is arguably a lot better in providing the true strength of a tropical system. Note that violent typhoon on the JMA scale actually starts at around middle of the road category 3 equivalents on the Saphir scale. 194 kilometers per hour is equal to 120 miles per hour, give or take a few miles per hour, that is. The North Indian. The North Indian is monitored by the India Meteorological Department, IMD, and they monitor from 100 east all the way to 45 degrees east. The IMD measures in 3-minute sustained wind speeds, which is a little bit different than 1 minute. You get a little bit better look at the strength of a storm that way. And note that the scale that we see here includes the very severe and extremely severe cyclonic storm. Those were actually only introduced in 1999. And also note that there is a little landmass called Asia, more specifically India, in the way of the Indian Ocean that happens to split it in two, with the Bay of Bengal on one side and the Arabian Sea on the other. When the JTWC monitors this region, like they do with every single one other than the Atlantic, that'll be repeated later. If a storm forms in the Bay of Bengal, they give it designation of B after their whatever name, and A for Arabian Sea. Makes sense. Note that for the Red Sea, there is most of the time such high shear that it just completely prevents tropical storm development. Shear is the worst nightmare for a tropical system, as unlike a thunderstorm that can kind of take advantage of it, the higher up you go, the worse it's going to get, which means that you can just have like the top of a storm just completely sheared off and then unable to form any further. Again, this region is the least active in the world and surprisingly actually peaks twice, once at the start of the monsoon season, and again at the end. The super cyclonic storm, as you can see there, sustained winds of 221 kilometers per hour is equal to 137 miles per hour, which is around low middle category 4 equivalents on the Saphir scale. Moving down into the southern hemisphere, we have the southwest Indian Ocean, where Cyclone Freddy, if I'm not mistaken, is still going on. This area is monitored primarily by the Météo France Réunion, if I'm not mistaken, based on Reunion Island, although I'm probably wrong about that. They monitor between Africa and 90 degrees east, and their modern scale was only introduced in 1993. They use 10-minute sustained wind speeds, just like the JMA. And their first documented season was actually in 1948. There's a little thing called World War II that ended only 3 years before that. Didn't know if you know. But yeah, I'd definitely consider a war to have a lot more priority than monitoring storms in a region where ships aren't exactly traveling all that much, but I get it. Their very intense tropical cyclone, the top of the line for them, starts at 212 kilometers per hour. This is equal to 131 miles per hour, which is essentially minimum category 4 equivalents. The true minimum is 130, but it's just one more mile per hour. We're just going to say minimum. Australia. Australia and Oceania have a category scale 1 to 5 and is monitored from west of 90 degrees east all the way to 160 degrees east. Note that each of the, I believe, 5 warning centers in Australia actually used their own name lists until 2008, which would have been hella confusing if they went into a different center's region of influence, I guess. Um, Certainly would not have liked that. And and the warning centers are actually not unified until 2020, which thank goodness they are now. That's very nice. The Australian Bureau of Meteorology gives themselves varying degrees of accuracy, specifically with forecasting the season, depending on the region, anywhere from very poor to very high. Which okay, that's kind of cool. Note that their Category 5 equivalents with sustained winds is 198 kilometers per hour and above. This is 123 miles per hour and is middle Category 3 equivalents on the Saffir scale. A very quick pass on the South Atlantic, which does not see storms very often and was simply thought that tropical systems actually simply did not occur here. However, they do, and because it was once thought this, and because they are so rare, they are unfortunately poorly documented. However, if there are records of it, their wind speeds are categorized using the Saffir-Simpson wind scale. We are going to end this video by looking at all of these similarities and differences on the scales. For example, all agencies name tropical systems upon reaching tropical storm status or equivalent on the Saffir scale. All of them have a depression, so to say, limit of around 62 kilometers per hour, which makes that very even across the board, thankfully. And only 2 regions do not have a hurricane equivalence, starting at 118 kilometers per hour, which is around 74 miles per hour. This does make things much easier on me, thankfully. Again, note that the Joint Typhoon Warning Center monitors every single region we just talked about here, except for the Atlantic, as the Atlantic already uses the Saffir scale. And on to our differences. There weren't that many similarities, to be honest, but of course the biggest difference is whether you call it a hurricane, typhoon, or cyclone. It just depends on region. They all mean the same thing. You can essentially just say that all 3 of these names mean a strong tropical system. The 2 that I mentioned that were not the same were Australia's and India's. Australia's Category 1 starts at 91 kilometers per hour, which is 56 miles per hour, and the IMD's cyclone starts at 63 kilometers per hour, or 39 miles per hour. The Category 1 for Australia would be like around middle tropical storm equivalents, and 39 miles per hour is just the beginning of tropical storm equivalents on both on the Saphir scale. Note again that the Saphir uses 1 minute sustained and is the only one primarily measured in miles per hour, and therefore the National Hurricane Center uses 1 minute. Again, the CMA and HKO use 2-minute sustained wind speeds, primarily, although they also do record 1 and 10-minute as far as I know. Like I mentioned earlier, the IMD uses 3-minute sustained wind speeds for their maximum, and Australia and the JMA use 10-minute sustained wind speeds for their maximum strength of a storm. Again, 10-minute is arguably a much better look because you can indeed have a 1-minute gust, although those probably aren't going to happen too often. It just really gives you an indicator, just a better indicator in my opinion, of the true strength of a storm. An example of this would be Super Typhoon Tip of 1979, which had 1 minute maximum wind speeds of 190 miles per hour. However, also had 10-minute sustained wind speeds of 160 miles per hour, meaning not only did it have well above Category 5 equivalents, 1 minute wind speeds, but it also had for 10 minutes Category 5 wind speeds as well, which is crazy because that is really hard to achieve for any tropical system. Doesn't matter if the West Pacific usually gives the strongest storms. That's still hard to do. However, with that, this is where we end looking at all of the looking at all the tropical storm scales of the world. I hope that you enjoyed this video and also learned something from it. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.